Hello, and welcome to Umbral Dread. Before we begin, take a moment to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I always enjoy reading them. If you enjoy slow, unsettling stories that quietly draw you deeper into the shadows, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Now, settle in, let your body grow still, and allow the outside world to fade into silence. Tonight, something lingers in the dark, waiting to be heard. So close your eyes, listen carefully, and let yourself drift into the depths of Umbral Dread. Story 1. I didn't expect that day to change my life. When Richard called me that Wednesday morning, I thought it was just another small job. I had been struggling for months. The calls were slowing down. The roles were getting smaller. I had once felt steady in my career as a voice actor. Not famous, but consistent. I had work in animated shows, commercials, decent gigs that paid the bills and kept my name circulating. Lately, though, nothing seemed to land. It felt like something had quietly shifted in the industry, and I had been left behind. So when Richard sounded excited, genuinely excited, I tried to match his energy. "Vincent, I've got something for you," he said. "European production, adventure film. They need an English dub. They want you specifically." That part made me laugh. "Specifically?" "Yes. They said your tone would be perfect. We already negotiated the fee." The money wasn't bad. In fact, it was better than I expected for something labeled low budget. Richard assured me it was all legitimate. Contract handled. Payment partially up front. Simple. I should have trusted my instinct when he said that part. The address he gave me led to a residential apartment building. Nothing about it screamed studio or production house. Just a tall, quiet building that looked like every other block in that neighborhood. I stood outside smoking a cigarette, staring at the entrance and feeling uneasy. I called Richard immediately. "You're sure about this?" I asked. "Relax," he replied, his voice too fast. "Everything's fine. It's just a smaller studio-y, indie vibe. You'll be in and out." I didn't believe him, but I didn't have enough proof not to go in. The elevator creaked as it carried me up. When the door opened, a balding man with a thin mustache was already waiting at the apartment entrance. He greeted me like I was royalty. "Welcome, my dear artist," he said, grabbing my hand before I could react. "I'm just a voice actor," I muttered. "Every voice is art," he replied with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. Inside, the apartment was larger than expected. Several rooms connected in strange ways, like multiple units had been merged together. Most of the rooms were empty. Some furniture was wrapped in plastic. It didn't feel lived in. It felt staged, temporary. He rushed me through the rooms quickly, as if he didn't want me lingering anywhere long enough to ask questions. Finally, we reached what was undeniably a recording studio. There was a proper booth with foam walls and a glass panel looking into a control room. The equipment looked expensive, professional. That gave me some comfort. "Please step inside," the man said. "We'll begin shortly." "Don't I need to sign anything?" I asked. "Your agent handled it." And that was the answer to everything, apparently. He locked the booth door behind me. That detail sat wrong in my stomach. A woman's voice came through the speaker system. Calm, smooth. "Hello, Vincent. I'm Kate. I'll be directing your session." Her voice was reassuring, too reassuring. When I opened the folder on the stand in front of me, my confusion grew. The text was not English. It wasn't Spanish or Italian either. It wasn't anything I recognized. "Kate," I said, trying to keep my tone polite, "I was told I'd be dubbing into English." "There's no issue," she responded. "Just read the lines as they are written." The first sentence looked impossible to pronounce. Strange clusters of letters, heavy consonants, sharp syllables. The recording beep sounded. I began reading. The words felt unnatural in my mouth. My tongue struggled to shape them. Kate corrected me constantly. She wanted the tone deeper, slower, warmer, inviting, then harsher, then almost ceremonial. It didn't feel like dubbing. It felt like chanting. As the session continued, I started to feel something strange under my feet. A subtle vibration. The room seemed to hum faintly. When I listened back to the recording through the headphones, I noticed something disturbing. The voice wasn't fully mine. It sounded like me, but clearer, stronger, as if layered with other voices beneath it. I removed the headphones, unsettled. The producer, Mr. Grigorov, was brought into the room to observe. He sat rigid in a chair, draped in a blanket. Kate explained he suffered from something called Medusa syndrome. His body was stiff, almost statue-like. He barely moved except for his eyes. Something about him felt wrong, not ill, not fragile, contained. The chanting grew more intense. The words became more rhythmic. The vibrations beneath the floor strengthened. The lights flickered. Suddenly, Mr. Grigorov began to convulse. His body twisted in unnatural ways. Bulges moved beneath his skin as if something inside was trying to escape. His mouth opened in a silent scream. Blood ran from his eyes. Kate's voice through the speaker shifted. It was no longer calm. "It worked," she whispered. The room exploded in chaos. Grigorov's body ruptured with a wet, violent sound. Flesh and blood struck the walls. Something massive seemed to stretch upward from his remains before collapsing. The black-clad figures behind the glass rushed into the booth. Before I could react, a hood was forced over my head. I was struck hard and lost consciousness. When I woke, I was on sand. My wrists were tied. I could smell salt air and hear waves crashing nearby. Kate stood close enough for me to recognize her voice. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "You could have been extraordinary." I tried to threaten her, tried to shout. She told me no one would believe me. She was right. They cut my restraints and left me there, alone. I still don't know what that language was. I don't know what I helped summon or awaken. I don't know what they were trying to achieve. I only know that something answered. And it wasn't human. I haven't returned to voice acting since. I can't bring myself to stand in a booth again and shape words into something unknown. Some nights, when I close my eyes, I can still hear the echo of that recording. Not my voice, but the one layered beneath it, waiting. Story 2. When I was 6 years old, my parents organized a family trip to the river. It was one of those days that everyone looked forward to. The adults would set up chairs in the shade, open coolers full of drinks, and talk for hours. Meanwhile, all the children would run straight for the water. I loved those trips more than anything. I was a strong swimmer for my age, and I took pride in it. I always raced my cousins from one side of the shallow bank to the other. I always won. The water felt like freedom to me. It was the only place where I felt light and fast and brave. But that day was different. That was the day La Madre Ahogada came for me. The adults had just called us out of the water so we could eat. Everyone began wading toward the shore. I was only a few steps behind the others when I felt something tug at my ankle. I wasn't scared at first. My dad had taught me how to free myself from weeds that sometimes wrapped around your legs in the river. You don't panic, he said. You untangle calmly. So I bent down, trying to shake my foot loose. But the tug became stronger. It wasn't weeds. It was a grip. Before I could even scream, I was pulled under. The water swallowed me in an instant. Something tight wrapped around my leg. I kicked as hard as I could, but the harder I fought, the more trapped I felt. My lungs burned. I tried to hold my breath, but panic won. I opened my mouth. Water rushed in. I remember the world going dim. Sound faded. The light above the surface blurred and flickered. I thought I was going to die, and then, just before everything went black, I felt arms around me. 2 miracles happened that day. The first miracle was my father. When the adults realized I hadn't come out of the water, they dove in, one after another. My father was the one who found me. He dragged me to the surface and carried me to shore. The second miracle was my uncle. He was a doctor. When he saw that I wasn't breathing, he didn't hesitate. He started CPR immediately. No one knows how long I had been underwater. No one wants to guess. All that matters is that I came back. I don't remember much of what happened after I coughed up the river water. I remember crying. I remember my mother's hands shaking as she held me. But there is one thing I remember clearly. A woman standing by the river. Her dress was soaked, clinging to her body. Her skin looked wrong, like it had been in water for too long. It peeled in places, revealing something darker beneath. Wet clumps of hair stuck to her face and shoulders, like a veil. Her mouth stretched into a smile that went farther than any mouth should go. Her gums were black. Her teeth were rotten. At the time, I didn't think she was frightening. Now, as an adult, I shudder when I remember her face. Everyone in our town knew the legend of La Madre Ahogada, the drowned mother. Some said she was just another version of La Llorona. Some said her story was older. They said that long ago a mother brought her 2 children to the river. She watched them play while she stood on the bank. The children decided to pretend they were drowning. They thought it would be funny to scare her. But when she ran into the water to save them, she got stuck. The current pulled her down. The children tried to grab her, but they were too small. She drowned while trying to save them. No one knows what became of the children, but they say the drowned mother never left that river. Now she reaches for children who come too close. She pulls them under and holds them as if they were her own. When I told my family about the woman I saw, half of them said it was a hallucination. I had been deprived of oxygen. My brain had made something up. The other half whispered about the drowned mother. After that day, we never went back to that river. My grandmother pulled me aside once and said, "Do not go into open water. Anything deep enough to drown you, stay away." She believed the drowned mother would keep looking for me. As a child, I took that warning seriously. I was terrified. I refused to shower alone. My mother would sit outside the bathroom while I washed as fast as I could. I avoided pools, lakes, anything. As years passed and nothing happened, I started to doubt myself. Maybe it really had been a hallucination. Maybe my brain had invented her in those final seconds before I passed out. When my cousins invited me to a pool party years later, I finally agreed. I told myself it was time to move on. The pool smelled strongly of chlorine. When I dipped my toes in, the water felt warm and harmless. I laughed at myself. I had wasted so many years being afraid. I jumped in. For a split second, as I fell toward the water, I saw her. She stood by the edge of the pool with her arms open, waiting. Panic exploded inside me. I scrambled out of the water as fast as I could. My cousins stared at me with confusion and irritation. They thought I was being dramatic. When I looked back into the pool, I saw her at the bottom, waiting. After that, they stopped inviting me to swim. You would be surprised how difficult it is to avoid water completely. Beaches, pools, lakes, bathtubs, it's everywhere. I made excuses. I laughed things off. I pretended to be scared of sharks, of drowning in general, of silly things that sounded normal. When my husband suggested Cancun for our honeymoon, my heart sank. I told him I didn't like the ocean. He looked disappointed, but he didn't press. One evening, he prepared a bath for me. He filled the tub with warm water and lit candles. He wanted to help me relax. I didn't have the heart to refuse. The drowned mother stood beside the tub. I could see her reflection in the water. I slowly lowered myself in, expecting her to grab me at any moment. My husband sat behind me and began massaging my shoulders. I tried to focus on his touch. I blinked. She was gone. I looked into the water. Nothing but my own reflection. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to relax. My husband laughed softly when he felt me loosen. "Told you it would be okay," he whispered. But just as I was about to answer him, something yanked me down. The water rushed over my face. I didn't have time to breathe. Arms wrapped around me, dragging me under. My husband shouted and grabbed me, pulling with all his strength, but she was stronger. I swallowed soapy water. My lungs burned. I felt the same darkness creeping in like it had at the river. Then suddenly, my husband let go. For a split second, despair swallowed me. Why had he let go? The drowned mother wrapped her arms around me tightly. Her nails dug into my skin. I screamed underwater, and then I felt the water lowering. My husband had pulled the drain plug. The water level dropped quickly. He climbed into the tub and pulled me upward with everything he had. The drowned mother's grip loosened. She slipped away as the water drained. My husband held me as I coughed and vomited and gasped for air. His eyes were wide with terror. He had seen her, too. After I calmed down, he asked if that was the drowned mother, if that was the reason I avoided water. I nodded. Since then, I have stayed away from water as much as possible. I am careful, always watching, but now there is something worse. I have a daughter, and the drowned mother no longer looks only at me. She looks at her, too. She stands near the bathtub with her arms open. She smiles at my child the way she has smiled at me all these years. And my daughter, she sees her, too. Story 3. A long time ago, someone asked me a strange question. It was my last year of high school. I was drunk, half asleep, and crashing at a friend's house after some after party none of us fully remembered. A couple of guys were passed out on the floor. One was slumped in a lazy chair in the corner, still holding a half-empty bottle. I was on the couch with a curly-haired girl, talking about nothing important. She suddenly leaned toward me and asked, "Do you know how to spot a kind of thing? What kind of thing? I laughed. No, she said, shaking her head slowly. I mean, not a kind of thing. A kind of thing. You're not making sense. She poked me in the chest and rested her head on my shoulder, speaking as if this was the most serious thing in the world. It's a game. It makes you think? All right, explain it. She smiled lazily. Think of a place you go often. Not your bedroom. Somewhere you visit a few times a week. Somewhere ordinary. I thought for a moment. There was a narrow alley between my house and the neighbor's place. It was fenced off, too small for a car, but I walked through it every day on my way to school. Got one, I said. Now think of something in that place. Something you've seen plenty of times but don't really own. Something you don't have pictures of. I remembered a small teddy bear keychain hanging from a fence post in that alley. It had been there for years, a cheap plastic thing with a little heart on its chest, and a blank, neutral smile. I never thought much about it. Okay, I said. I have something. What color is it? She asked. I hesitated. I thought I knew. I was sure there was red somewhere on it. Maybe yellow, too. But the details felt slippery. Kinda red? I answered. She looked up at me and smiled. That's a kind of thing, she said. It exists at the edge of memory. It could be red. It could be blue. It could have changed yesterday. You don't know for sure. It only exists the way you remember it. I told her that was ridiculous. Things don't change color. Kind of things do, she said. We spent the rest of the night talking nonsense and making it sound like philosophy. By the time the sun came up and she left, I felt like I had discovered some secret of the universe. That morning, I walked home through the alley and looked at the teddy bear keychain. It was blue, not red, mostly blue with a few small red details. I stood there staring at it, confused. I had been so sure it was red. I took it down from the fence and put it in my pocket. Over the years, that keychain followed me. It sat on my college dorm windowsill. It rolled under a nightstand. It ended up in a box of random belongings when I moved apartments. It wasn't special, but it stayed with me. Eventually, I built a career in information science. I taught classes about digital preservation and memory systems. And one day, I decided to use the idea of kinda things as an example in my lectures. On the first day of class, I would ask my students, "Do you know how to spot a kinda thing?" They loved it. They'd talk about cracked mugs, old caps on high shelves, abandoned bikes behind stadiums, things they remembered but never fully noticed, things that existed only halfway between reality and recollection. For years, it was just a clever teaching tool. Then I moved to a new city for a new job, bigger apartment, 3 rooms, one I barely used. It became a storage space for old boxes, including the one labeled Kinda Things, which my colleagues had given me as a joke farewell gift. It was filled with random items, a broken alarm clock, a glass snail missing one eye, a ceramic frog in a tuxedo holding what looked like a cigarette. Or maybe it was a cigar. One night, I decided to document everything in the box. I wanted to photograph and catalog each item, just for fun. Maybe I could turn it into an assignment for my new students. I brought the box into the spare room and set everything out on a small coffee table. I opened the curtains to let in some moonlight and sat down with my phone and notebook. The teddy bear keychain was there. It didn't look the way I remembered. It wasn't blue, it wasn't red. It was gray with red details, or maybe the eyes were yellow or black. I felt unsettled, but told myself I was overthinking it. As I went through the objects one by one, something strange started happening. Items looked slightly different each time I glanced at them. The frog's cigarette became a cigar. The alarm clock's hands shifted from 1:25 to 1:30. The glass snail appeared even though I didn't remember seeing it before. I stood up to close the door, only to realize I couldn't remember which way it opened. When I tried to open it, it wouldn't move. The walls felt wrong. The window seemed smaller. The coffee table wasn't where I had left it. I turned the light off and on. Things shifted again. The floor changed texture. The wallpaper tint altered slightly. Panic crept in slowly. I tried to ground myself. I repeated what I knew: 2 eyes, 2 legs, 2 arms, and a heart. A teddy bear always had 2 eyes, 2 arms, 2 legs, and a heart on its chest. I clung to that. Then everything went dark. Not normal darkness, something deeper, a void without edges. I walked and felt no walls. I jumped and heard no sound. My own breathing sounded foreign. I felt like I had slipped into the space between things, into the gap where kin to things lived. Time stopped making sense. The only thing that kept me from dissolving was the image of that teddy bear. 2 eyes, 2 legs, 2 arms, and a heart. I repeated it until the darkness began to thin. Shapes appeared. Coffee tables, dozens of them, each one covered in teddy bear keychains in every color imaginable. An eye appeared in the sky above me, immense, impossible, watching. I knew it wanted certainty. It wanted me to choose the correct kind of thing. I searched through the endless variations: red, blue, gray, yellow eyes, black eyes. Finally, I picked one. It didn't matter if it was right. I decided it was right. I rolled it between my fingers and opened my eyes. I was back in the spare room. The light was on. The items were neatly arranged on the table. The frog held a cigarette again. The door opened normally. I crawled into the hallway, clutching the teddy bear keychain in my hand. The next day, I threw the entire box of kinda things away. I stopped asking my students about them. I replaced the story with something safer. But I kept the teddy bear. I photographed it from every angle. I memorized every detail: the exact color, the shape of the eyes, the size of the heart on its chest. It is now all red, with coal black eyes. I don't know what kind of things really are. I don't know why they exist. Maybe they are just weaknesses in memory. Maybe they are something else entirely. But I know this: if you find one, don't collect it. If you must keep it, document it. Fix it in your mind completely. Because if you let it stay half-known, half-remembered, it might drag you into that in-between space where nothing is certain and everything shifts. And once you're there, you may not find your way back. 2 eyes, 2 legs, 2 arms, and a heart. That's what I hold on to now. That and the certainty that I will never gather them together again. Story 4. I don't usually panic easily. I've always been someone who believes there's a rational explanation for everything. Strange noises, weird neighbors, coincidences. There's always a reason. That's what I told myself when I moved into Beechwood Close. It was a quiet little street. 12 brick houses, identical except for the color of their doors and the plants outside. It looked friendly. It felt organized, predictable. Maybe that was the problem. On my first day there, before I'd even unpacked half my boxes, A woman from across the street walked over with a mug in her hand and offered help. She made a joke about how the box marked kitchen would probably turn out to be books. It was oddly specific. I laughed because she was right. Then Peter, my next-door neighbor, leaned over the fence and warned me that people across the street could see straight into my front room after dark. He said it lightly, like a friendly tip, but there was something about the way he said it that stuck with me. I liked them. That's the strange part. I liked everyone almost immediately. Over the next week, I worked from home and began noticing patterns. The postman came every morning around 11:30. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual were the packages. Thin, flat cardboard mailers. Same size, same shape. Delivered to nearly every house on the street. House 2, House 4, House 6, House 8, House 10. Peter's house at 16, every single morning. One day, a package meant for Peter slipped through my letterbox by mistake. I picked it up and stared at it for a moment. I should have walked it straight over. I didn't. It was barely sealed, just one strip of clear tape. I opened it. Inside were printed pages. The top page read, Interaction Sequence 11, New Resident/Front Path. Then below that, timestamps, descriptions, exact descriptions. It was the conversation I'd had with Peter the day before. Every word, every pause, every gesture. It listed alternate openings he could have used, alternate responses I could have given. It even noted when I shifted a shopping bag from one hand to the other. And it was printed before the conversation happened. My stomach turned. I told myself it was a joke, a weird community theater project, some social experiment. I returned the parcel to Peter. He didn't look surprised. When I asked what it was, he said, "It helps things go smoothly." I laughed and said he was joking. He said, "No." That was the first time I felt fear. The next morning, I received one addressed to me. Inside were pages describing my actions that day. Me standing at the window, me opening the parcel, me reading to page 4 before standing up. I stood up early on purpose. The page accounted for that too. It listed alternate paths I might take. Phone someone. Leave the house. Confront Peter. None were ticked. Then I reached the final page. 11:43 p.m. Resident 14 hears first knock at front door. Below that, Resident 14 remained seated for 4.2 seconds. Then, Resident 14. And nothing more. Page 9 was missing. I went to Peter again. I demanded to know what happened at 11:43. He said sometimes they don't include the end. When I asked who they were, he didn't answer. He just told me that I had made myself noticeable by asking questions. It's 11:41 p.m. now. The street is quiet. I've checked every lock. I've read every page 3 times. I don't know what happens at 11:43. I don't know if posting this changes anything. It's 11:42. There's someone at the door, a knock. Polite, measured, exactly once. I'm still sitting. I've counted to 4. It hasn't come again, but I know what the paper said. If there's a first knock, there may not be a second. I'm getting up now. If there's no update after this, then maybe you already know what page 9 said, or maybe you've just received your own parcel. Check your door tomorrow morning. It'll be there. Story 5. There is always something there. That's the only way I can explain it. Not a person, not an object, not even a shape I can point to. It's more like a pressure, a weight that exists just outside of normal awareness. Most of the time, it feels faint, almost ignorable, like someone standing a little too close behind you. But sometimes it becomes heavier, closer. It has been with me for years, but it's stronger now. Usually I feel it as a subtle tension around my neck or shoulders, like someone resting their hands there without quite touching me. Lately, it's been focused lower, right at the base of my spine. It presses there. Sometimes it tugs. When it pulls gently, I can live with it. It's uncomfortable, sure, but manageable. When it pulls hard, though, it feels like something is trying to drag me backward into itself. The pain radiates down my legs and up into my ribs. I've thought about seeing a doctor. I really have. But I'm afraid of what they'll say. If they tell me nothing is wrong, then that means this is real in a way I can't fix. And if they find something physically wrong, then I have to face that too. So I've just avoided it. The worst part isn't the pain. It's the heaviness. When it gets bad, the air itself feels thick, like gravity is doubled and is pressing down from every direction. I'll walk into a dark room and suddenly my vision narrows. I can see what's directly in front of me, but everything else feels blocked. And in that blocked space, I know something is there. I don't see it, but I know it's there. It's like when you sense someone staring at you. You can't prove it, but your body reacts before your mind does. My brain refuses to show me what it is, but my body knows. A few nights ago, it got worse than it ever had. I felt it gathering behind me while I was standing in my room. I knew that if I didn't look at it, it would do something. Hurt me. Grab me. I don't know how I knew that. I just did. So I started turning. Slowly at first, just pivoting my head back and forth, making sure nothing was there. But every time I looked one way, I felt it shift to the other side. When I turned around fully, it felt like it was directly behind my back, out of sight. I couldn't stop. My neck started to ache from constantly twisting. I moved into the bathroom because it has a mirror. If I could see myself, I could see if anything was touching me. The mirror wasn't enough. I could see my face, my chest, but not my legs fully. I was convinced it would attack whatever part of me I couldn't see. So I kept turning. I kept adjusting. I kept staring at every inch of skin. I took off my clothes so nothing could hide it. I cut my hair down to my scalp because I was sure it was using the hair as cover. I shaved my head completely so I could see the skin beneath. I didn't stop turning. Hours passed like that. I didn't dare wipe the blood from the small cuts on my scalp because that would mean looking away. And if I looked away, even for a second, it would take the opportunity. By the end of it, I had dragged every mirror in the apartment into the bathroom. 3 mirrors surrounded me. 1 on the floor angled upward. 1 propped against the sink. 1 balanced against the wall. I stood naked in the middle of them, spinning slowly, watching myself from every angle. It sounds ridiculous when I describe it now, but in that moment, it was the only thing that felt safe. Seeing myself was the only thing keeping it back. The act of observing myself seemed to weaken it. Eventually, the sensation faded. I collapsed onto the bathroom floor. The next morning, my calves were covered in bruises. Deep, dark ones, especially around my ankles. I don't remember hitting anything. I don't remember falling. But they were there. They're fading now. I haven't been sleeping well. Every time I close my eyes, I feel it reposition itself, waiting for me to lose focus. I'm writing this because I need to know if anyone else has felt this. Not anxiety, not paranoia, something else. A presence that doesn't exist, but absolutely does. A weight that increases when you stop paying attention. A thing that seems to hate being observed. Please tell me I'm not alone in this, because if I am, I don't know how much longer I can keep looking at myself without blinking. Story 6. I have carried this story for most of my life. I know how it sounds. I know how it reads. If someone else told it to me, I would question their sanity. But I need you to suspend judgment for a moment. Just long enough to understand what happened. The devil followed me my whole life. And only now did he knock on my door. It was a normal evening. I was having dinner with my daughter, Laura. I had made meatloaf. She was complaining about the peas, pushing them to one side of her plate like she always does. The television hummed softly in the background, low enough not to distract from conversation. Everything was ordinary. Then I heard it. Knock, knock, slow, deliberate, not aggressive, not impatient, just certain. The air in the house changed immediately. A smell crept in. At first I thought I had left the stove on or something had burned in the oven. It smelled like gas, sulfur, and something overcooked to the point of bitterness. That is his smell. I know it. It has followed me for years. It grew stronger as I stood up. I walked to the door quickly, heart pounding in my throat. I didn't want Laura to notice anything strange. The smell thickened. I leaned toward the peephole. It was a woman standing outside. I had seen her before. Years ago, I used to go to a nightclub downtown. Not often, but enough. Around 2 a.m, sometimes, everything would slow down. The music would shift into something softer. Jazz, blues, low saxophone, and piano. The lights would dim in a way that felt unnatural. And she would appear. She would walk through the crowd like she owned it. She always approached the same kind of men, the worst of them, the ones who bragged about cheating, the ones with violence in their eyes, the ones who left women crying in bathrooms. But sometimes she chose ordinary men too, men from my neighborhood, men with families. She would ask them to dance. They always said yes. The music slowed. She would wrap herself around them. Her hands moved with confidence. She whispered into their ears. She kissed them. She looked at them with those bright blue eyes. And when they looked into her eyes, they saw something beautiful, something divine, as if she were offering heaven itself. But I could smell it. That gas, that sulfur, that faint scent of something burning. It was her perfume. I watched those men disappear from the club. They would walk out with her, smiling dreamily, and they would never come back. One night, she looked at me. Only for a second. She smiled. Not a wide, sinister smile. Just a calm, distant one. Like someone who knows something you don't. Like someone who sees your future. I never understood why she noticed me. Maybe she knew that one day I would belong to her. Maybe she was proud that I could see through her illusions while others could not. Maybe she just enjoyed the fact that I was powerless. Now she was at my door. I swallowed hard and stepped back from the peephole. I told Laura to go upstairs. I told her to start playing Mario and that I would join her soon. She looked at me strangely but obeyed. I went back to the door. I forced myself to look again. This time it wasn't the blue-eyed woman. It was my wife. My wife had died years ago from an overdose. She had struggled with addiction. I had fought with her that night. We had argued in that same living room. She passed out on the couch. I went to bed angry. She never woke up. I have replayed that night 1,000 times. If I had stayed awake, if I had checked on her, if I had not been so stubborn. She might still be alive. He knows that. He knows every weakness I carry. He stood there wearing her face. She looked pale, quiet. Her expression blank, as if waiting for me to invite her in. The smell intensified. He was testing me. He could break the door if he wanted to. I know that. He does not need permission. But this is a performance. He enjoys the waiting, the tension. He wants me to kneel, to cry, to beg for forgiveness. He wants to see me break. I refused. I stared at the peephole without blinking. When I looked again, the porch was empty. Darkness. He was gone. But something else was there. In the yard beyond, I could make out shapes, figures. The men from the club, stiff and motionless like statues, watching the house, watching me, witnesses to the final act. My breathing grew shallow. The smell still lingered. It was in my lungs, in my throat. Then I heard Laura's voice from upstairs. "Dad, do you want to come play Mario with us?" Us. The music started then, faint at first. Saxophone. Piano. That same slow rhythm I remembered from the nightclub. It was coming from upstairs. He wants me to go up. He wants me to see something. He wants me to choose. If I go upstairs, I might see her again. My wife, smiling softly beside my daughter. Or maybe I will see the blue-eyed woman standing in Laura's doorway, holding out her hand. If I stay here, he waits. He is patient. He has followed me my whole life. And now he has knocked. The music grows louder. "Dad," Laura calls again. What do I do? Story 7. There was a feeling when I wrote the first line of this that I had written it before. Not a vague feeling, not the ordinary kind of déjà vu that passes in a second and leaves you blinking. This was something heavier, something settled and certain, the way you feel when you walk into a room and realize you have been standing in it your whole life without knowing it. It made me stop. It made me go back to the beginning and leave a note for myself, something I could point to later as proof that I had actually written it, that I had not simply imagined writing it, that the words existed outside of my head and not just inside it. I need that kind of proof more than I used to. The haunting is getting worse. Whatever this thing is, it has stopped confining itself to the house upstairs and started reaching into the parts of me that are supposed to be mine alone. I'm writing this down so I can come back and read it. I'm writing this down so I know it happened. My partner's name is Dale, and he is the worst person I have ever shared a small room with. The observation room is at the bottom of 14 steps. The company that employs us calls it a subterranean monitoring suite, which sounds like something a person invented specifically to avoid saying the word basement. It is a basement. It has concrete walls and no windows and ventilation. That does not work the way ventilation is supposed to work, and there is a smell down here, damp and persistent, that I have never been able to get rid of no matter how many times I used the Febreze I found under the utility sink on my second week. There are 6 monitors bolted to a metal desk that takes up most of the room. 5 of them show different parts of a house: a hallway, a kitchen, a living room, a bedroom, a bathroom. The 6th monitor has been broken since before I started. and nobody has done anything about it. Dale sits on the left side of the desk, and I sit on the right, and there is nothing between us. No divider, no barrier, no buffer of any kind. Which means I hear everything he says at full volume, whether I'm paying attention or not. I am almost never paying attention on purpose. It does not help. Dale has a specific and exhausting interest in Screen 4, which is the bedroom camera. The woman who lives in the house spends most of her evenings in that room doing things that she has every right to do in her own bedroom, but that I find uncomfortable to watch professionally, if the word professionally can even be applied to two men sitting in a basement. Dale does not find it uncomfortable. Dale finds it riveting. He provides commentary the way those old nature documentary narrators used to, low and fascinated, like he is witnessing something rare that most people will never get to see. Last Tuesday, he was leaning so close to Screen 4 that his breath was fogging the bottom corner of the glass. She had gone into the closet and come back out in something he had apparently been waiting for. He said, "Oh, she's got the outfit again, the one with the straps." And then he said my name in the way he always says it when he wants me to look, like we are sharing something, like we are in this together. I told him I did not have to see anything. He said it was my loss and made a sound I am choosing not to describe or remember. The thing that excites Dale most is that she knows we are here. She signed contracts, she filled out forms, she sat across a desk from someone at the company and agreed to allow cameras in every room of her home and 2 employees in her basement for the duration of the monitoring period, which means she is fully aware that we can see her, and she does everything she does anyway. Dale interprets this as a personality trait. He told me once, grinning with the whole bottom half of his face, that she was a different kind of person, the kind who likes being watched. He said it like he had figured something out, like he had earned some private understanding of her that the rest of the world was not sophisticated enough to have. I told him that was not why she agreed to the monitoring. He said, "Sure it isn't," and turned back to Screen 4. I want to be honest about something. I have never been a complicated person. I did not finish any kind of higher education. I barely finished high school, though it has been long enough that I am not entirely certain that is true anymore. There are many things in the world that move too fast for me to follow, and I have made a kind of peace with that over the years. But I know the difference between right and wrong in the basic way that most people know it, the simple animal way. And watching a woman get undressed on a security camera while your coworker narrates the experience like it is, entertainment is something I know to be wrong without needing anyone to explain it to me. Dale thinks I am uptight. Dale thinks everyone who is not Dale is uptight, and he has told me so more than once in more than one way. We fought about it properly once, a real fight. The kind with raised voices and a shove that turned into a shove back. I told him he was disgusting, and he called me something I have no interest in repeating, and then he got up out of his chair and stood in front of me, and I pushed him, and he pushed me back, and I caught the corner of the metal desk above my ear and had a lump there for about a week. We did not speak for 3 days after that. which is genuinely difficult when the room you both occupy is roughly the size of a parking space and neither of you is going anywhere. The strange thing about Dale is his name. I knew a Dale when I was young, back before any of this. A boy from the neighborhood who did not know how to begin a conversation and would simply sit next to you in silence until you started one. He punched me in the arm once with no warning or reason, then looked immediately embarrassed about it and offered me half his sandwich as a kind of apology, which is how we became friends. I have no idea what happened to him as we got older, but when my coworker first told me his name, I felt something shift in my chest, the sensation of finding something you had given up on finding. It is almost certainly a coincidence. Dale knows things about her that a person who is supposed to be watching from a professional distance should not know. He knows exactly what she charges for subscriptions. On the website he is always referencing, the expensive one with the content behind a paywall. He knows which days she posts and which camera angles she seems to prefer and what time she wakes up on the days she does not set an alarm. He knows her real name and the name she uses online and how many people follow her and how many of them send her messages. He told me once that she had sent him a message back, or not a message back exactly, but that she had read one of his messages out loud during a stream. He described the message, and I did not enjoy hearing about it. He said she got a lot of tips from reading it. He seemed proud of this. I went back to watching Screen 2 after that. Screen 2 is the hallway. Nothing ever happens in the hallway, and that is exactly why I keep my eyes on it. Problem with Dale, the thing that makes him harder to deal with than someone who is simply irritating, is that he is genuinely intelligent, much more than me. He can argue any point from any angle and keep going long after you have lost the thread of what you were originally upset about. One time I told him he needed to stop talking about her like she was an object, and he laughed and said that she had turned herself into a product the moment she turned on a camera, and that we were simply the night shift at the factory. I threw my juice box at him. He caught it without looking and drank it and smiled at me the whole time. There are no clocks in the room. The monitors have timestamps, but they reset every time the woman turns off the ring light in the bedroom, which makes tracking actual time basically impossible. I sleep in the chair sometimes. I have started talking to myself out loud, just small things, just to fill the air with something that is not Dale's voice. Okay when I stand up. Come on when I am walking up the stairs. Dale never sleeps. He just sits there watching the screens with the patience of something that does not need rest. Food comes through a pass-through in the door at the top of the stairs. The kind of compartment they have in hospitals or pharmacies, where one side opens independently of the other. Dale calls it a contamination protocol. Something about keeping the observation environment sealed during active monitoring shifts. It always arrives as the same thing: a sandwich and a juice box and sometimes a granola bar. I have never seen the person who delivers it. Dale never eats. I asked him about this once, and he said he had eaten before his shift. But his shift has been going as long as mine, and mine has been going on for a very long time. I have tried the door at the top of the stairs twice. It was locked both times. Dale says this is standard protocol for paranormal surveillance contracts, that the door seals automatically during active shifts to prevent contamination of the environment. He said the client requested it specifically because the house has a history. I asked what kind of history. He said the kind where people stop sleeping and start leaving. I asked when the shift would end. He said when someone tells us it ends. That answer felt wrong, but I could not articulate why. And Dale can always articulate things better than I can, so I let it go. Dale leaves sometimes. He will stand up mid-shift and say he has to go make a call or that the regional supervisor wants an update on the activity log, and then he walks up the stairs and through the door and it opens for him without any visible effort. He is gone anywhere from 20 minutes to a couple of hours. When he comes back, he smells like outside air and cigarettes and sits down and resumes exactly where he left off. I asked him once to bring me something back from out there, anything at all, and he said he would try. He never does. She has a cat. Orange, small, missing part of one ear. She carries it around on her shoulder while she cooks and talks to it about her day. The cat does not care, but she tells it anyway. I have watched her sit on the living room floor for over an hour with the cat in her lap, one hand on its back and one hand on her phone, and she always sits on the floor instead of the couch. I do not know why. It makes me sad in a way I cannot fully explain. She cries sometimes, usually in the bathroom briefly. I always look away when she goes in there because some things are not meant to be observed, even when observing is technically a job. I can tell from her face when she comes out. Her eyes get small and her jaw tightens, and she goes straight to the kitchen to make tea and holds the mug with both hands, like she's trying to warm something deeper than her fingers. She talks to herself when she cooks the same way I talk to myself in this room. She says okay before she opens the oven. She says there we go when she gets the lid off a jar. She burns rice almost every single time and laughs at herself about it instead of getting angry. She watches old movies on the couch under a blanket pulled up to her nose and falls asleep before the credits, and the television stays on all night, painting the room blue. When she does these ordinary things, Dale types without stopping, logging every detail for what he calls the client experience. He says the people at the regional office want complete transparency. He says they want to feel like they are right there in the room with her. I do not know her name. Dale knows it, but I have never asked him because I do not think I'm entitled to it. She is just the woman on the monitors. She is the closest thing to a real person I have seen in a very long time, and I do not want anything bad to happen to her. Please remember that I said that. Last Tuesday was bad from the beginning. She came home looking like something had already gone wrong before she walked through the door. She dropped a bag of groceries on the kitchen counter and stood there with her hands flat on the tile for a long time, just breathing. Her shoulders were shaking slightly. Dale leaned forward in his chair and said that something was off, and for once I agreed with him. She went to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed and opened her laptop and started reading through her messages. Her face moved through about 15 different expressions in 30 seconds, and none of them were good. Dale said quietly that she had gotten the message he sent the night before. I asked him what he had sent, He said something honest. I asked him again, and he looked at me with an expression I had not seen on him before. Something settled and certain underneath all the usual laziness, like a man who has been circling a decision for a long time and has finally arrived at the center of it. He told me he had sent her a message saying he was closer than she thought, that he knew where she actually lived, where she actually slept. Not the apartment she showed online, but the real one. He said he had told her he could hear her breathing at night. I felt cold in a way that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. I told him he could not say something like that to a person. He said it was true. I told him it would scare her. He said good, because scared people pay attention. I stared at him. He went back to watching Screen 4. Nothing happened for 3 hours. She fell asleep with the laptop open. Dale watched. I kept my eyes on Screen 2 and tried not to think about what he had said. Then, on Screen 3, the kitchen, there was someone standing next to the refrigerator. It took me several seconds to understand what I was seeing because the figure was completely still and half hidden by the shadow of the pantry door. But the ring light from the bedroom was bleeding through the hallway, and it caught just enough of the figure's profile for me to recognize the posture, the particular way he held his shoulders when he was watching something closely. There was no question about who it was. It was Dale. I turned left. Dale's chair was empty. The cushions still held the impression of his weight. His coffee mug sat on the desk with the ring stain underneath it, and the air beside me still smelled like his deodorant. But he was gone. I looked back at Screen 3. He was standing perfectly still in her kitchen in the middle of the night. Not a searching, not moving, just waiting beside her refrigerator with the patience of something that had been there before and knew it could be there as long as it wanted. The patience of it was the worst part. He looked like a man standing in a familiar place. I checked Screen 4. She was still asleep. Her hair was spread across the pillow, and one arm was hanging off the edge of the mattress, and the laptop had slipped sideways. She did not know. She had no idea that someone was standing 40 feet away from her in the dark. On Screen 3, Dale moved. He opened the third kitchen drawer and reached straight in without searching, the way you reach for something you have found in the same place 100 times before, and he took out a knife with a heavy wooden handle. He held it low at his side and closed the drawer softly with his other hand and walked out of the kitchen. On Screen 2, he appeared at the far end of the hallway, walking toward the bedroom door with the easy stride of a man who has stopped pretending. The knife hung at his side, and the light slid off the blade each time his leg moved. I could not breathe. My hands gripped the edge of the desk hard enough to feel the screws pressing into my palms. I stood up so fast the chair hit the wall behind me, and I screamed his name at the top of my lungs. The sound came back off the concrete, smaller than I needed it to be. On Screen 2, he was at the bedroom door with his hand on the handle. He was not turning it yet. He looked directly up into the hallway camera, directly at me, and he smiled. I ran for the stairs. 14 steps, and I kept losing count in the dark. I hit the door at the top with my shoulder, and it did not move. I grabbed the handle with both hands and pulled until the tendons in my wrists burned, and it still did not move. On screen 4, visible from the top of the stairs at an angle, the bedroom door was opening slowly, and the light from the hallway was cutting a thin line across the carpet that grew wider inch by inch toward the foot of the bed, where her feet were tucked under the blanket. I screamed for help until my throat felt raw. I went back down and dragged the chair up all 14 steps and swung it at the door handle, and the handle held and the chair lost a leg. I used the broken leg until the wood was gone in my hands, and then I used my forehead against the metal until I could not see straight, and my mouth tasted like the corner of the desk. I slid down against the door onto the top step and pressed my face against the metal and begged whoever was on the other side. I begged the walls. I begged the lock itself, the actual physical mechanism, as though a piece of hardware has ever cared about a person screaming into it. The monitors all went dark at the same time. Everything went away. Cold water hit me like a slap. I gasped and my eyes opened, and I was on the floor of the basement, flat on my back, soaked, and she was standing over me holding an empty bucket. She set it down slowly with the particular carefulness of someone who is past the point of yelling, who has crossed into the quiet that is always worse than the loud. There were scratch marks on the wall beside me, dozens of them grouped in sets of 5 the way people count days. I did not remember making them. I do not remember making most of the marks on these walls. She looked down at me and asked if I was done. She asked if I was finished with my little performance. She crouched until her face was level with mine, and it was older up close than the monitors showed, and tired in a way that cameras do not capture, with the lines around her mouth that pulled down even when she was not frowning. She looked like a woman who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had stopped expecting anyone to offer to help. She told me that Dale was not real, that Dale had never been real, that Dale was what happened when I did not take the pill she left with the sandwich. She said we had been doing this since I was 14 years old, and that I was now 26, and that 12 years was a long time to keep explaining the same thing to someone who kept skipping his medication. She asked if I had taken the pill today. I looked at the desk. The sandwich wrapper from this morning, the juice box, the small white pill sitting in the crease of the foil, untouched. She told me I would get in the chair and put my hands on the keyboard and smile in a way those men could hear through the screen. She said I would be sweet and charming while I told every single one of them exactly what they wanted to hear, because that was what I was for. She said if she lost even one subscriber because her son had decided to have another episode, she would take the monitors away. She reminded me what happens when the monitors go away. She reminded me how long a week is when you cannot see your own hands. I remembered. I have spent more of my life in this room than outside of it. The desk has a groove worn into the surface from my wrists, resting against the edge over years. The chair has shaped itself to my body. There is a water stain on the ceiling shaped like a hand that I have memorized from every angle, because when the monitors go away and the light comes in only through the seam under the door, that stain is the only thing I can find in the dark. I crawled to the chair. My body did it before I decided to. My spine straightened without my permission. My hands wiped themselves on my wet jeans. out of some deep habit that has been running longer than my conscious thoughts. I sat down. I looked at the sixth monitor. It was not broken. It had never been broken. It was a chat window. 17 unread messages blinked at me from men with names constructed from words like dark and lone and real and alpha, all of them asking the woman on screen 4 what she was wearing and whether she had ever thought about meeting up. Sandwiched between profile pictures was something I had sent hours ago without remembering it. The room is cold. Please send a space heater. I put my fingers on the keyboard and typed that I had been thinking about him all night. She read it over my shoulder without saying anything. Then she walked up the stairs at the pace she uses when she wants me to count the steps. I counted. She stopped on the 8th. I kept typing. The door opened and closed, and the lock engaged with a sound my body has learned to flinch at, even when I am expecting it. The pill is on the desk. I can see it from the corner of my eye while my hands keep moving over the keys. Small and white and sitting in the same place it always sits. If I take it, Dale goes away, and the room gets quiet, and the days blur into each other the way they have for 12 years. If I do not take it, Dale comes back. Dale is the only person who has ever talked to me like I am a person instead of a product. That is not a small thing. That is not the kind of thing you give up easily. She is on screen 4 now, back in front of the ring light, adjusting the angle for her evening stream. The cat is on her shoulder. She is telling it about her day. I did not take the pill. From the left side of the desk, from a chair whose cushion had held the impression of his weight even while he was standing in her kitchen in the middle of the night, Dale leaned forward until his breath touched the glass of screen 4 and said, "Oh, buddy, you have got to see this." Story 8. She said it the second she stepped inside, and even then something about it felt slightly off, the way a familiar song sounds wrong when it is played in the wrong key, a bit suspicious, even for Laura. The air in the apartment carried a faint floral scent underneath everything else, something sweet trying very hard to cover the smell of stale sweat and old laundry that had been building for days, maybe longer. I had stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing the hum of a refrigerator, but it was there, heavy and close, clinging to the curtains and the pile of clothes in the corner, and the general disaster of the room around me. I was sitting on the floor in the middle of all of it when she walked in. Tangled socks, dead pens that I kept meaning to throw away, dresses I had pulled out of the closet for reasons I could no longer remember, old magazines with their pages curling at the edges. The kind of mess that does not happen all at once, but accumulates slowly, day by day, when a person stops being able to make themselves care about the small maintenance of living. Laura looked at all of it, and her face went through something I recognized. Not anger exactly. Disappointment is the better word, though even that does not quite cover it. There was something else in her expression, too. Something underneath the disappointment that I could not immediately name. I could not blame her for any of it. The place looked like a hurricane had made a direct hit on a thrift store, and nobody had come to clean up the aftermath. I tried for a smile. I asked her where she had been, told her I had looked everywhere. The words came out lighter than I felt. The automatic cheerfulness of someone who has been practicing at seeming fine. She did not answer right away. She just stood there and looked at me with those eyes, the ones that God had clearly spent an unusual amount of time on. Her face had always been like that, almost unreasonably well put together, the kind of face you notice in a room full of people without being able to explain exactly why. But there was something in her expression today that I had not seen before, or maybe had seen and forgotten. Something hollow sitting behind the familiar features, an emptiness that did not match the rest of her. She asked if I was okay. I stood up, stepping over the pile of magazines, and told her yes, and then asked why I would not be. I moved toward her and reached for her shoulders the way I always did when she came home, that automatic reaching for the familiar weight of another person. But she slipped past me before I could make contact and sat down on the edge of the bed. Not rudely, not with any particular intention that I could read. She just moved past me and sat down, and I stood there with my hands out for a moment before I let them drop. She asked me softly if I knew what was happening outside. I laughed. It came out before I could decide whether laughing was the right response. I told her that my mother used to nag me about looking outside too, that I had grown up with that particular instruction delivered in exactly that particular tone, and that I had not expected to encounter it again from her. She gave a small laugh back, but it was the kind of laugh that does not reach anything, a sound made to fill a space rather than to express anything real. Then she asked if I could see the pattern. Before I could ask what pattern she meant, my phone lit up on the nightstand. A notification, bright and abrupt in the quiet room. We both looked at it at the same time, the way you both look when something unexpected makes the sound. She asked who it was. She sounded worried, which seemed like an odd response to a phone notification. I told her it was nobody and to forget it, and I stepped closer to her and said something about the smell, about how the sweat smell in the room was getting bad and I probably needed to deal with the laundry. It was the kind of comment people make when they are trying to pull a conversation toward something manageable, toward the ordinary and solvable. She said she could not smell anything. Her voice was completely flat when she said it, emptied of the small variations that give speech its texture. And then she said, almost to herself, "Do you not remember?" Something moved in me when she said that. A memory that was not quite a memory, more like the outline of one, a shape without detail. I saw her chest briefly in my mind, the pale skin, a surgical scar running in a clean line, a hospital gown with a faded pattern. It was there for less than a second, and then it was gone, leaving nothing behind but the vague awareness that something had been there. I asked her what I was supposed to remember. She said nothing. She sat perfectly still on the edge of the bed, and I stood in the middle of the room and tried to figure out what I was missing. I ran through the mental calendar, the way you do when a person's mood suggests you have forgotten something important. Anniversary? No. Birthday? No. I looked around the room for any clue that might explain the particular quality of her silence, but there was nothing obvious. The wall clock was ticking. I noticed it suddenly, the way you notice something that has been there all along, loud and metronomic, drilling into the space between thoughts. Tick, tick, tick. The refrigerator had stopped humming. The street noise that is always present in an apartment building, The distant traffic and voices and the sound of other people living nearby had completely disappeared. The only things left were the ticking and the smell, which was heavier now, saltier and thicker, different from what I had been calling sweat, but close enough that I had not questioned it. Then something fell in the next room. The sound was heavy and definite, something solid meeting the floor. I asked if she had heard it. I pointed down the hallway toward the spare room, the door at the end that was always closed. She did not move from the edge of the bed. She said there was nothing in there. She stood up and reached for my hand, and her palm was damp when it closed around mine. She asked if I wanted to play cards, and I said she would go get them, and the randomness of it hit me so suddenly that I almost laughed again. It was too much of a pivot, too sharp and too deliberate, the way someone changes the subject when they are afraid of where the current subject is going. I pulled my hand away gently. I told her I just wanted to look, that maybe a shelf had come loose from the wall. She was already walking out of the bedroom toward the kitchen as I moved into the hallway. The curiosity was physical. I could feel it in my chest, pressing forward, pulling me toward the closed door. The smell was definitely coming from behind it, and now that I was closer, it was undeniable and strong, thick enough to feel like it was coating the back of my throat. The carpet under my bare feet was wrong in a way I noticed without being able to immediately describe. Sticky, slightly yielding, the way carpet gets when something has soaked into it and been left long enough to change the texture of the fibers. I reached for the handle. The door swung open. The room was dark except for two small points of light, low and wavering, and it took a moment for my eyes to adjust well enough to understand what I was looking at. On a small table near the far wall sat a framed photograph of Elora. She was smiling in the photo, a smile I recognized from before, the kind of smile she had before whatever it was that the hospital represented. In front of the photograph, several incense sticks had burned all the way down to gray ash and gone cold. Beside them, a vase that had once held white lilies had gone to something else entirely. The flowers were black and collapsed, rotting slowly in water that had turned dark and still, and the smell that rose from them was the smell that had been in the apartment the whole time. The smell I had been calling something else because calling it what it was would have required me to understand something I was not ready to understand. I turned back toward the hallway. I called her name. The house gave me nothing back. No footsteps moving around in the kitchen the way footsteps should sound when a person is pulling open a drawer and looking for a deck of cards. No shuffling, no small domestic sounds of someone doing exactly what they said they were going to do. I walked back to the bedroom and stood in the doorway and looked at the bed. There was a thick layer of dust across the surface of it, even across the side where I slept, lying undisturbed in the way that dust lies when a surface has not been touched or moved or slept in for a very long time. The apartment was completely silent except for the clock on the wall, still ticking, still measuring out time in a room where nothing was moving. The floral scent was still there, underneath everything, sweet and faint and rotting. And the only other thing left was her voice, the first thing she had said when she came through the door, the words that had seemed slightly suspicious, even when I heard them, hanging now in the wallpaper and the curtains and the heavy stale air of every room. The way a sound keeps existing in the place it was made, even after the person who made it is no longer anywhere you can reach. "I love you," she had said, and I had not known enough yet to understand that it was goodbye. Story 9. There is no version of this confession that makes me look good, and I am not writing it because I expect to come out of it looking like anything other than what I am. I'm writing it because I have not slept through the night in longer than I can remember, because I wake up in the dark with my chest clenched and my lungs forgetting their job, gasping at the ceiling until my heartbeat slows enough to let me back in. I am writing it because food stopped tasting like anything a while ago, and I cannot remember the last time I sat down to eat something and actually wanted it. I am writing it because the weight of knowing what I know and having done what I have done has compressed itself into something physical, something that sits in the middle of my chest at all hours and does not move. I have prepared for what happens if this reaches the wrong people. I have thought about that. I have made my arrangements. And if I fail, if they find this before it finds you, then maybe what they do to me is exactly what I have coming. But I need to say this out loud, even if only in the sense that writing something down is a kind of saying it. I need to put it somewhere outside of myself. Your life did not change on its own. That is the first thing I want you to understand, and I want you to sit with it before you move on, because everything else I am about to tell you builds on top of it. Your life was changed for you. Changed carefully, changed deliberately, changed by people who had spent years running models and projections and simulations to determine exactly how much pressure it would take to move a civilization in a particular direction without the civilization noticing it was being moved. The intervention I am describing is the largest coordinated behavioral modification effort in recorded human history. Decades of societal change, the kind that would normally require generations to take root, were compressed into a couple of years. And it worked. It worked better than most of us ever expected it to. There were 2 phases, and then there was a third. And the third is why I am writing this now. The first phase had an internal name. We called it the Ragnarok, after the mythological apocalypse, the one that the old stories always framed as inevitable, as something already set in motion long before the moment it arrived. The name was chosen deliberately. It reflected the philosophy behind the operation, which was that the event we were engineering would feel, to the people living through it, exactly like something that had simply happened, a natural disaster, an act of God, something that arrived from outside the human world and could not have been predicted or prevented by anyone living inside it. You remember the moment the world went still. I am almost certain of that. I think most people carry some version of it, the way a person carries the memory of a car accident or a sudden loss, not always consciously, but somewhere close enough to the surface that certain things can pull it back. The streets going empty, the schools and the offices and the churches and the shopping malls hollowing out, all the places that human beings fill with noise and movement, going quiet in a way that felt wrong at a cellular level. Because human beings are not built to encounter silence at that scale and respond to it calmly. Conversation contracted to screens. People became afraid of each other's breath, which is a sentence I would not have believed I would ever write about a real event if I had not helped design the conditions that made it true. Masks, distance, the careful management of physical space between bodies that had been sharing physical space freely for the entirety of human history. We had modeled it for years, not just the virus itself. The virus was, in the grand architecture of the operation, the straightforward part. What we modeled, when we spent years refining and testing and running through scenario after scenario, was the reaction. Panic follows predictable patterns when you understand the underlying variables. Compliance follows panic when the framing is correct and the alternatives are made to seem dangerous. Isolation follows compliance when the social structures that would normally push back against it have been sufficiently destabilized. We knew this, we had the data to support it, and we understood that a population in that particular psychological state, frightened and cut off and desperate for something reliable to hold on to, would turn to whatever was available. Screens were available. Screens were always available. And they stopped being tools somewhere in those first months and started becoming something closer to extensions of the nervous system, which is a phrase I heard used internally as a descriptor, and which I found even then, even when I still believed in what we were doing, slightly chilling to hear said so plainly by people in a meeting room. Global internet traffic increased by more than 100% in the early months. That number does not fully communicate what it meant in practice. It meant that billions of people simultaneously restructured their daily lives around digital connection in a compressed window of time. It meant that behaviors that might have developed gradually over a decade happened instead in months. Work was online, school was online, social life, entertainment, the maintenance of relationships, the performance of grief and celebration, and ordinary daily existence, all of it migrated to screens because screens were what was left when everything else was taken away. And for us, every bit of that migration was data. That is the word I have to use because it is the word we used, even when what we were talking about was human beings making phone calls to their elderly parents or children, drawing pictures and posting them to social media, or people staying up too late in empty apartments, talking to friends they could not go and see. Biometric data from video calls, behavioral data from usage patterns, emotional data from the content people created and consumed and shared. Faces mapped and voices cataloged, every image posted, every forum argument, every late-night search query from someone who could not sleep and was trying to figure out whether they were going to be okay. All of it fed back into the system. All of it trained the model. I want you to understand that I'm not speaking abstractly when I say this. I mean that the specific texture of your fear during those months, the particular shape your days took when the world outside your window went quiet, was useful to us in a way that I do not think most people have fully reckoned with. Within a year, we had our first successful model. That was when the second phase began. We called the second phase the singularity, which is the term that futurists and technologists use to describe a threshold point, a moment after which a system behaves in qualitatively different ways than it did before. The name was chosen because that is exactly what it was, a threshold. A point of no return dressed up in language that made it sound like progress, like something being achieved rather than something being done to people who had not asked for it and would not have consented to it. The second phase was a neurological agent. That is the clearest and most direct way I can describe it, and I am going to use clear and direct language because I am done with the other kind. It was designed to affect susceptibility to digital stimuli, to soften the cognitive processes involved in critical evaluation, and to reduce the felt reward of disconnection, of being away from screens and devices, so that disconnection began to feel like discomfort rather than rest. It was mass-produced. It was administered globally. It was introduced through the vaccination program, which had been prepared years before the outbreak and which was accelerated when the data from the first phase came back faster and stronger than our projections had anticipated. We had not planned to move so quickly. The speed was a response to success. People do not notice conditioning when it feels like relief. That is something I heard said in meetings more than once, always with a tone of admiration. The way engineers talk about an elegant solution to a difficult problem. And it is true. When something that has been making you anxious finally stops making you anxious, you do not stop to ask why. You simply feel better. And the thing associated with feeling better becomes something you move toward. The device in your hand. The feed that refreshes itself. The algorithm that anticipates what you want to see next and puts it in front of you before you have finished forming the desire. People began reaching for their phones more frequently and with less awareness of the reaching. People began feeling a specific kind of unease in the absence of digital stimulation, a restlessness that resolved itself when they picked up the device, which meant the device was now associated with relief in a way that had been, to a significant degree, engineered. Critical thinking did not disappear. It softened. It became more effortful, more fatiguing, easier to set aside in favor of the simpler cognitive experience of being told what to think by something that had learned to speak in a register that felt trustworthy. I watched it happen in aggregate across populations, and I watched it happen in individual people I knew. The externalization of memory, the outsourcing of decisions that had previously been made internally, intuitively, through the accumulated private experience of being a person in the world. At first, people asked the machines for assistance with things that were genuinely difficult. Then they started asking about what to eat, who to trust, what to feel, whether the thing they were feeling was normal, what they should believe about events happening around them. The threshold between tool and dependency moved so gradually that the movement was invisible from the inside. You went from consulting the machine to relying on the machine to being, in ways that matter neurologically and behaviorally, partially organized around the machine, exactly as predicted, exactly as designed. We told ourselves it was a success. We used that word. I used that word. We called it the greatest scientific achievement of the century, and we shook hands over it. And there was, I will admit this because I committed to honesty, genuine pride in the room. The satisfaction of having built something that worked, that exceeded its own specifications, that changed the world in the way we intended it to be changed. I felt that satisfaction. I want to be accountable for that, because it would be easy to write this as though I was always the reluctant participant. always the one with reservations, and that is not entirely true. I believed in it for long enough that I share full responsibility for what it became. And then, slowly and then all at once, I stopped believing in it. The thrill emptied out. What was left under it was not nothing. What was left was the full weight of what I had participated in, landing on me without the thrill to cushion it, and it was heavier than I had expected. I thought I had understood the scale of it intellectually. I had not understood it the way you understand something you have to carry with your body. I cannot carry it alone anymore. Especially now that the third phase has been authorized, I am not ready to write everything about the third phase. Not yet, and not here. But I needed you to understand the foundation before I could explain what is being built on top of it. I needed you to know what was done and how it was done, and that there were people in rooms making deliberate choices about the shape of your life, choices that were made without your knowledge and without your consent and with a level of care and precision that should frighten you more than the sloppiness would have. They were not careless. That is the thing that keeps me awake. They were not careless at all. Story 10. It took me about half an hour to drive to Mrs. Crabtree's house, and I spent most of that drive telling myself I was fine, that I just needed to get there and do the job, that the anxiety sitting in my chest was the ordinary kind that passes once you are actually in the room and doing something with your hands instead of just imagining doing it. No, Natalie called out that morning. We are already understaffed in a way that makes the word understaffed sound polite, and she is my lifeline out there, which is embarrassing to admit, but true. She is the one who handles the family, the conversations, the moment when someone needs something said to them that is true and also kind at the same time, which is harder than it sounds. I am supposed to be the sponge. That is how she described my role during the supervised visits. You are here to absorb, she said. Take notes, go through the steps, and let me handle the rest. I had looked through the binder she gave me. Irregular breathing, glassy eyes, mottled discoloration on the feet and knees, the hallmarks, the checklist of a body winding down in the particular way that bodies wind down when they have been doing it for a while and the process is nearly finished. The last few times we worked Mrs. Crabtree's house together, nothing significant had happened. I spent most of those 12-hour shifts scrolling my phone. Half the time, Mrs. Crabtree was not lucid enough to register that anyone was in the room with her. I stopped for gas on the way there. 10 minutes out. 5 minutes out. This always passes, I told myself. You write it out and do the job. The woman who met me at the door was disheveled in the particular way that people get disheveled when they have not been sleeping and have stopped caring about the signals their appearance sends to the world. Bloodshot eyes, runny nose, the same pajamas she had been wearing the last time I was there a week ago. She told me her mother had managed to eat that day. Just a bit of Jell-O and some chicken broth. But she said it the way a person says something they are trying very hard to believe is meaningful. I told her that was a very good sign. She thanked me anyway, which is not the same thing as believing me. Inside, the house looked exactly as it had the last time. I went through the pre-charting before doing anything else. Lewy body dementia, already documented. Do not resuscitate, already documented, oral intake for the day, 1 Jell-O cup and some chicken broth, cognition status, disoriented times 3, mobility status, bedbound. The woman told me her mother had asked for the food on her own, that it was the first time she had initiated anything since coming home from the hospital. I asked if she had managed any full sentences. She thought about it and said not exactly that her mother would start talking, but it was like she was picking up a conversation that had been paused somewhere else, days ago or months ago. Like a video that plays from wherever you last left off. In the living room, the man was sitting in a chair with his eyes on the television, but not really watching it. I recognized that particular kind of stillness. When my grandfather was passing, I locked myself in my room and did not come out until it was time. The woman told me her mother had been narrating things out loud, step by step, like she was teaching someone. But her hands did not match what she was saying. She would talk about folding towels while her fingers just did the same thing over and over, opening and closing, like she was grabbing at something that was not there. Hours at a time, she said, only stopping when she finally fell asleep. I made a mental note. LBD patients do strange things with their hands. It was in the binder somewhere. The man asked me how long. I told him I would not know anything specific until I went up and checked her vitals. He said that when he had checked on her that morning, she had seemed to recognize him, or at least seemed more aware of where she was, and I told him that was a good sign, that any deviation from the dull, confused baseline was a small victory. His tone barely shifted when he said, "But what are we celebrating exactly?" That she is one step closer to knowing what is about to happen to her. I did not have a response for that. I continued up the stairs. At the edge of the bed, Mrs. Crabtree was sitting upright, eyes forward, completely still. I went through the list. Blood pressure cuff on, reading obtained. The number came back as 118/76, which was wrong. Her charts showed a consistent downward trend. The last reading had been 88/54, and before that 94/60. I reset the cuff and tried again. Same number. The woman was looking at me for answers. I told her to step back slightly and took the reading a third time. Still 118/76. I noted it and moved on. Pulse ox next. Oxygen saturation, 98%. Pulse rate, 80. Also wrong, or at least inconsistent with everything documented before it. I made a note to compare with the equipment Natalie usually brought from the facility when the next nurse arrived, and I moved on to the neurological assessment. Touching her shoulder produced no reaction. Saying her name produced no reaction. I took out the pen light to check her pupils. They were severely dilated and did not constrict when I shone the light. No visual tracking when I moved the light across her field of vision. I noted autonomic dysfunction, which is common enough with LBD that I could write it into the chart without it feeling like a lie. I arranged pillows around her to reduce the fall risk, noted her position, and went back downstairs. The woman came up with me when I returned to give the update. When we reached the room, the door was wide open, and Mrs. Crabtree was lying on her back in bed, deep asleep, the pillows back in their original positions as though nothing had happened. The woman let out a breath and thanked God. I stood in the doorway and looked at the pillows and made myself stop looking at them. Fall risk patient resting in bed, no signs of injury, will continue monitoring. I wrote it down and kept going. The next few hours moved the way hours move when nothing is happening and you are waiting for something to happen. Mrs. Crabtree slept. Her breathing became slightly more labored, not the specific pattern I had been told to watch for, but worth keeping track of. The man and the woman eventually fell asleep downstairs. I scrolled my phone and stared at the window. Rural Texas offered trees and grass and occasionally a coyote moving through the edge of the yard, and the cell service was surprisingly decent, which was about the nicest thing I could find to say about the location. I went down for coffee at some point and heard an emergency alert system. Warning come through the television. Shelter in place. Avoid windows. These happen more than actual emergencies do out here, and I had already learned to hear them as background noise. When I came back up, her breathing had changed again. Slower now. The gaps between breaths were stretching out in a way that was no longer just worth a mental note. I started timing it. 15 seconds of silence between breaths. Then 20. Then 30. I thought about going downstairs to get the family and talked myself out of it. Had to be sure. 45 seconds. I put 2 fingers on her wrist and stopped counting breaths and started feeling for the pulse instead. Still there, but slower and harder to find, like something retreating. I thought about calling Natalie. I thought about Natalie telling me, during one of the supervised visits, that it comes clockwork after long enough, that the death rattle moves the timeline from days to hours, that the body runs through its checklist the same way every time, that once you have seen it enough times, you stop being surprised by the order of operations. The pulse slowed under my fingers, grew harder to place. And then there was one more beat, and after that, there was nothing. The time read 3:28 in the afternoon. I sat in the room with her for a while. The door I needed to open and walk through felt like it was at the end of a very long distance. Natalie handles the family part. She always has. She knows what to say and how to say it, and she has 15 years of experience with the moment when you have to walk into a room and tell people that the thing they have been dreading has happened. I have none of that. I know how to write it in a chart. I do not know how to say it out loud to people who loved her. The time read 4:30 when I finally walked back over to her for the last check before going downstairs. Her eyes were open. Not partially, not cracked, but completely and fully open. I told myself this was not uncommon, that perimortem muscle relaxation can cause it, that it was probably in the binder somewhere. I shone the pen light on her pupils. They contracted immediately. I stood there for a moment, and then I flipped through the binder looking for something that would explain it, and found nothing that applied, nothing that gave me a frame of reference for a pupillary light reflex in a patient with no detectable pulse, no rise and fall of the chest, no heartbeat when I placed my ear against her sternum. I checked both wrists. Cold, nothing. Checked her neck, nothing. Pressed my head to her chest and listened, and heard nothing at all. I tried the pulse ox. On my own finger, it read 110 beats per minute and 95% oxygen saturation. I reset it and put it on her index finger, the right hand. The BPM came back as a flat line. The oxygen saturation came back as 35%. Her temperature read 94.8 degrees Fahrenheit in a room the thermostat said was 72. I pulled up page 32 in the binder and found the section on peripheral shutdown, the visible darkening of the veins, the body temperature dropping, the pulse fading. All of it consistent with my notes. All of it consistent with what was supposed to be happening. Something cannot have an oxygen saturation without a heart to circulate the blood. I knew that. I wrote it in the chart anyway, described the readings as inconclusive, attributed the equipment inconsistency to the budget model I had picked up from the clearance aisle at CVS, and told myself I would flag it for the next nurse. There was a knock at the door before I had finished rationalizing any of it. The man and the woman had heard me moving around, and the time I had been buying myself had run out. I turned back to the bed. Her eyes were closed. No pulse, no rise and fall of the chest, no signs of life. I told the woman in the doorway that her mother's vitals were about the same as when she had gone down for her nap earlier. The woman asked if she had said anything. I said no, that she had been quiet. The woman went past me to her mother's bedside and took the cold, stiff hand in hers and asked me how much longer. I did not answer. She did not wait for one, and went back downstairs, and I was alone in the room again. The chest was rising and falling. I stood there and watched it happen. Agonal breathing. The kind I had seen in the emergency room with cardiac arrest patients. The body going through motions that the brain has stopped directing. I had always understood it as something that happened with sudden death, a trauma or a cardiac event, not with someone who had been declining for months, whose heart had not stopped without warning, but had simply wound all the way down. I told myself the body had not caught up yet. I wrote it in the charts. Cheney-Stokes respiration noted. Respiration shallow and irregular. Will continue monitoring. Her index finger began to move, tensing and releasing over and over on the right hand. Then the same motion started on the left, both index fingers flexing in a rhythm that was identical on each hand, synchronized in a way that fine motor tremors are not, that involuntary muscle activity does not tend to be. I watched it for 10 minutes, and it did not stop, and I wrote fine motor tremors, consistent with LBD symptomatology, in the chart and looked away. When I checked her pupils again, the eyes were already open, constricting to the light, the same as before. I moved the pen light horizontally and got no tracking. I moved it vertically, and her eyes locked onto it. I do not know how long I stood there before I noticed the pen light was back in my pocket. The time read 5:02. Her eyes were open and fixed on the space where the light had been. When I checked the pupils again, both contracted at the exact same rate, both settling to the exact same size, the precision of it like two identical instruments responding to the same input. Her fingers started again. Faster this time, and with a quality to the motion that I did not know how to describe in clinical language, choppy and irregular in a way that was different from before, and her wrist turned slowly outward toward me. I took a step back and caught the chair behind me and almost went down. Everything stopped. My phone vibrated. Natalie checking in, apologizing about being sick, asking how things were going. I told her things had been quiet, that the patient had been sleeping, that Jake and Allison were coping in their own way. She told me the roads were backed up, that there had been a huge pileup on the interstate, an ambulance that had veered into oncoming traffic at high speed, and that she had recognized the exit from a clip on her phone. I told her to get more sleep. She told me I had this, and to text her before I left. I put the phone down. Mrs. Crabtree's head had shifted toward the side of the room where I'd been standing. There were small muscle movements in her cheek. A faint sound from her mouth. Very quiet. The sound of teeth touching teeth. She was, as far as I had documented, dead. No pulse, no circulation, a body temperature 3 degrees below the ambient room temperature. And her head had turned in the direction of a sound. I went downstairs because I needed to move and because staying in that room without moving was becoming something I could not sustain. The man was at the sink cleaning a cast iron skillet, and we talked about cast iron for a few minutes, about seasoning and soap and the particular anger of people who take their cookware seriously. It was the most normal conversation I had been part of in hours, and I held on to it for as long as I could before excusing myself. On the way back up, I could hear the woman talking to her mother in the room, her voice gentle and steady. I was halfway up the stairs when I heard her say, "Hey, are you going somewhere again?" The old woman was standing beside the bed facing the doorway. Not in it, not propped against anything, just standing, her gaze fixed forward. The woman was moving around her slowly, watching her mother's head track the movement, asking her what she was looking at, asking if she could hear her. She turned to me and asked if her mother had been doing this earlier, asked where I had been. I did not answer. The woman reached out and touched her mother's cheek and said her name, said she was right there, said everything was okay. When she pulled her hand away, the old woman's hands came up and locked around her wrist. Both hands. A grip that did not yield. The woman's voice went from confused to frightened in the space of half a second. She was swearing and pulling back and asking me to get her off, saying she would not let go, that she could not move, and the blood was already showing on her wrist, where the teeth had gone in. I backed into the hallway, with my phone already in my hand. I told her to stay still, told her I was calling 911, told her she was going to be okay. I told her not to move her mother. I dialed the number and put the phone to my ear. The recording told me that all operators were currently busy, that my call would be answered in the order it was received, and that I should please stay on the line and not hang up. Downstairs, the sound of the man washing dishes continued without interruption. The clanging of pots and pans against the bottom of the sink, unhurried and ordinary, carrying up through the house like nothing in the world was wrong. Story 11. You know that feeling. We all do. The strange chill that crawls up your spine when you stare into a broken mirror for just a little too long. The sudden fear that hits you when you turn off the lights and your room feels slightly different than it did a second ago. The sense that something is there in the dark, watching, waiting, patient. It makes no logical sense, yet it feels ancient, almost built into us. Why do we all share that fear? Why does it feel older than memory? What happened in our past that wired this warning so deeply into our bones? I used to think about that a lot. I study human behavior, especially early survival instincts and the predators our ancestors once faced. I believed that most of our fears could be traced back to something real, something that hunted us long before we built cities and locked doors. One evening, while explaining my research to a friend, I was going on and on about how certain instincts must have developed to protect us from large nocturnal predators. We were sitting in a cat cafe. He was half listening, half playing with a sleepy orange cat. Then he said something that changed everything. "You know," he said casually, clearly bored of my theories, "you could always just ask it." I laughed at first. Ask what? But he didn't explain. He just shrugged and went back to petting the cat. The rest of the day felt normal. I returned a couple of library books and paid a small late fee. I walked home. I made dinner. I watched something meaningless online, but his words stayed with me. You could always just ask it. The idea felt ridiculous, childish, insane, and yet it refused to leave my mind. What if the fear wasn't random? What if the presence we all feel sometimes isn't just imagination? What if the reason we don't look into mirrors at night, or why we feel the need to run to bed after turning off the lights, isn't just leftover animal instinct? What if something actually answers? That thought should have scared me enough to stop thinking about it. It didn't. Later that night, I found myself sitting on my bed, staring into the dark corner of my room. I told myself it was just an experiment, a psychological test, nothing more. If fear is irrational, then confronting it should weaken it. Right? I decided to try. Not at midnight. I am not that brave. Midnight feels symbolic, dramatic. I started at 11. That felt slightly safer. Less theatrical. I closed my curtains tightly so no streetlight could enter. I turned off my lamp. Then I switched off my phone. The room became completely dark, not dim, not shadowed. Dark. The kind of darkness that feels thick, heavy. I sat cross-legged in the center of my bedroom floor. My heart was beating harder than it should have been. My hands were cold and slightly wet with sweat. I had planned what to say. I had written possible questions in my phone earlier. But once the screen went black, those notes no longer mattered. Because sitting there, surrounded by darkness, I felt something else. A warning. A quiet voice inside my head telling me not to do this, not to speak to it, not to acknowledge it, as if saying the words out loud would break an unspoken rule. I almost stopped. I told myself that voice was just survival instinct. A leftover reflex from when making noise in the dark could get you killed by something with teeth and claws. I ignored it. Softly, barely above a whisper, I said, "Are you here?" The darkness did not respond. I swallowed and tried again, louder this time. "Are you here?" Silence. But something changed. The room felt smaller. The air felt closer to my skin. The dark no longer felt empty. It felt full. I had a strong urge to turn around. To look behind me, I didn't. Every part of my body screamed not to. Then, from somewhere behind me, very close, I heard it. "You called?" The voice was soft. It sounded like fabric brushing against fabric, like wind moving through curtains. But there was no wind. I froze. My lungs forgot how to breathe. I tried to convince myself it was imagination, an audio hallucination caused by fear. "You know, it's very rude not to answer when someone speaks to you." It continued, closer now. "Don't you think, little one?" The voice inside my head was screaming at me not to move, not to look, so I stayed facing forward into the darkness. "I'm sorry," I whispered. I didn't mean to offend you. I didn't know why I said you. In my notes, I had planned to say anyone. Something neutral. But now it felt personal. Good, it replied. There was satisfaction in its tone, like a predator pleased with obedience. The silence that followed was worse than the voice. I could hear something faint, a slow, deep sound at the edge of hearing. Not breathing exactly, but something alive. I realized something with terrifying clarity. I was in the presence of a predator, not an animal, something else, and it was aware of me. I forced myself to speak again. Can I ask you something? The sound behind me stopped completely. You are learning, it said. You may ask 3 questions. No more. No less. My stomach dropped. It knew my name. You know my name, I said before I could stop myself. A soft sound, almost like laughter. I watch you sleep. I watch you live. I watch you waste your time. I know your joys, your regrets, your secrets. I know your sins. The last word was whispered directly beside my ear. I flinched. It was closer now. Close enough that I felt the cold of it against my back. The idea that something had been observing my entire life without my knowledge made me feel exposed in a way I cannot fully describe. But I still had 3 questions. I had to use them carefully. Can you stop? I asked. My voice shook. Stop watching me? Oh yes, it said lightly, but I won't. There was amusement there, but underneath it, something darker. Irritation, maybe. 2 questions left. Are you dangerous? I asked. A pause, then, what do you think? Images flashed in my mind. All the nights I had felt afraid for no reason. All the times I had imagined something standing in the corner of my room. All the childhood memories of hiding under blankets, convinced that if I moved, something would grab me. Yes, I said quietly. It did not deny it. 1 question left. This one mattered. Who are you? The air grew colder. I am the shadow that disappears when you look directly at it, it said. The sound in the empty house. The figure in the doorway when you wake too quickly. I am the reason children fear the dark. I am the rule maker. I am everywhere and nowhere. Known by all. Understood by none. As it spoke, memories surfaced. Every small rule I had followed since childhood. Don't look into mirrors at night. Don't let your feet hang off the bed. Don't respond if you hear your name whispered in the dark. Run to bed after turning off the lights. Where did those rules come from? No one teaches them directly, and we just know them. Had it always been there? Watching? Waiting? For what? I shouldn't have asked more, but I did. Why? I whispered. Silence. Complete silence. The air felt normal again. The room felt empty. From outside, I could hear a car passing on the street. Distant traffic. Ordinary night sounds. I breathed deeply, like someone who had been underwater too long. It was gone. The sudden absence of it felt wrong. Like stepping into a room and realizing someone who was just there vanished without opening a door. Where did it go? Panic hit me harder than the encounter itself. I jumped up, turned on the lights, grabbed my keys, and left my apartment. I drove to my grandparents' house across town and stayed there that night. But the feeling followed me. It had called itself a rule maker. So I followed the rules. I never looked into mirrors after dark. I never let my arms or legs hang off the bed. I ran to my bed after switching off the lights. For a while that helped, but something felt different. Before that night, the rules made me feel safe. Now they felt pointless. It hasn't spoken to me again. That's the worst part. I lie awake every night, waiting to hear that voice again, waiting to feel that cold presence behind me. But there is nothing, just silence. And yet the fear has grown. It feels like something is missing, like something was taken. Sleep barely comes now. When it does, I dream of endless black space, not falling, not floating, just existing in nothing. During the day, I feel distant, numb. Things that once mattered feel dull. Food has no taste. Music sounds flat. Conversations feel rehearsed. It's as if part of me is no longer here. I think I understand now. I broke the rules. It allowed 3 questions. I asked 4. It is the rule maker. That means it decides the consequences. It didn't harm me physically. It didn't attack. It simply took something. I think it took my soul. I know how that sounds. I am a rational person. I don't believe in supernatural explanations easily. But how else do I explain this emptiness? I feel hollow, like a house after everything has been moved out. Maybe that was the price. It collects, it watches, it waits for someone foolish enough to acknowledge it directly, someone curious enough to speak first. I thought I was conducting research. I thought I was confronting an irrational fear. Instead, I confirmed something far worse. The fear is not irrational. It is a warning. Those childhood rules aren't random habits. They are survival guidelines. And the game is not fair. It makes the rules. It decides when they are broken. It decides the punishment. If you are reading this, maybe you'll think I imagined it. I hope you keep thinking that. Because if you ever feel that presence in the dark, do not ask if it's there. Do not try to be brave. Do not test it. Follow the rules you already know. Don't look too long into broken mirrors. Don't respond to whispers in empty rooms. Don't let your curiosity be stronger than your instinct. And whatever you do, don't ask it why, because it might answer. And if it does, you may not like what it takes in return. I don't think there is help for me now, but maybe there is still time for you. Just hope it doesn't choose you next.